Hello and welcome to our prayer gathering here on Wednesday, July the 14th. I'm George Fuller, the pastor at Wendell Christian Church. And this week, we're talking about continuing to discuss the book Prayer, Finding the Heart's True Home by Richard Foster. And today we're on chapter 9 that is titled The Prayer of Rest. The opening quote that Richard Foster puts in the book is rest in God's love. The only work you are required now to do is to give your most intense attention to his still small voice within. So everyone, what were the things that you noticed in the chapter? And we'll talk through the chapter in a minute, but what are the things you noticed? What was your experience of the chapter, insights or questions that came up as you were going through it this week?
I'm working on it. I had a hard time with this one.
With rest?
Did you?
Chapter, I
Okay.
read it and it's over my head, I'm sorry.
It's over your head, okay.
And maybe that's my problem.
I just couldn't relate, I mean, I read it and read it.
Good. No, that's all right.
Well, I think my biggest thing is it's telling me what I know, but I don't do. And that is to be still, rest. And I do what the gentleman in here, when he had taken the boat over and he was sitting there and, he's trying to be still, and yet he thinks, oh, I better go. They're probably looking for me. And I do that. I cannot turn my mind off to be still and rest. I try so hard, and I'm sitting there, and then the stuff keeps coming in, and I'm going, no, I'm not going to think about that now. And that's a hard thing, but it's good to see that I'm not the only one that has that.
No, he points it out, but it is very hard for the people of our time and culture to do what he's talking about.
There's so much going on.
It is very, very hard.
And I looked for a quiet place because they keep talking about a quiet place. Okay, well, I live in town. And I don't care if I go outside or inside, it's not quiet. I would sit there. I have had my television on very little, and I'm a TV person. I usually leave it on 24/7 because just in case I'm not there, I'm sure the dogs want to see what's on TV. But I have not even had the TV on looking for quiet. And I sit there and I hear this, kid go riding by on a skateboard, and it's, or a bicycle with a radio attached to it.
Yeah.
Or, I go outside and it's dogs barking in the neighborhood or people talking I can hear. So I had a very hard time finding quiet.
Yeah.
And if I am still, I feel like I should be doing something.
Exactly.
That's me. I think
Guilty.
that's my maybe.
Feel like you should be doing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have time to do this. I got things to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
My quiet is a little bit different. I live on Wendell Boulevard, but I sit back far enough. If I close the curtains in the front of the house, I don't see all the traffic going by. But what I do is I make this list every night before I go to bed, what I'm going to do the next day. And I wake up and I look at my list. And then I try to have coffee and go to my quiet place. And although it's nice and quiet and the backyard's pretty and all that, the list still keeps coming back to the front of my mind.
Yeah.
It's like, how much longer can I afford to stay here without starting all these things I decided I have to do?
Yeah.
Yes, I have that trouble waking up during the night thinking and trying to, and I start praying thinking, well, this will clear my mind, But prayer leads to more thinking. I once asked a neurologist, was there such a thing as an overactive mind.
Mhm.
And that was back in the probably late 80s, early 90s. And he looked at me kind of funny. Do you know about 5 or 6 years later, I found out there was a whole realm of psychology now dedicated to the overactive mind.
Yep, that's right. Um, Yep. Anything else you guys noticed or questions, or we'll talk through it and share some of our experiences.
Well, when I'm in the midst of struggle, I just can't find that. I mean, I can't be quiet. I can't, you know. I can pray, but I just have a hard time with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did mention to my sister last night when I was talking to her on the phone, and I think it came up in here somewhere, but, based, just on things that I'm dealing with at the moment, I need serenity.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I need is serenity, so I'm going away for a few days.
Good.
David and I and the dog are going away for a few days. In a little cabin.
I can't hear that.
Staying in a little cabin by a creek.
Teresa said they're going away for a little while.
And I'm hoping to rest and find some serenity while I'm there.
Well, I'm going away, but I won't find some because I'm leaving Martha. So there goes my serenity.
You're gonna be worrying about Mark.
It's the truth. I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
Yep. I've got somebody to check on him every day, but still, in the back of my mind is this: should I have gone? Should I have stayed? You know. So. A whole new realm of thoughts.
Yep.
And you probably know from being a caretaker to your parents.
Yeah, it's,
They don't want to go, well, they can't go.
yeah, I don't think I really ever known anybody who struggled to pay attention to what was going on. I think at the same time, I haven't met anyone who found it hard to pay attention to God. And so, the reason this book exists is because you don't just wake up with a spiritual life and know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And the reason each chapter exists is because here's a way, a path that has worked for people who follow Christ. And the ones who wrote about it, did it, benefited from it. My guess is every single one of them, if you ask them how it was at the beginning, they would say it seemed impossible, incomprehensible. I couldn't do it. I didn't do it. And then the disciplines of prayer and meditation and following Christ are things we learn. And the prayer of rest is, this is judgmental of myself and my culture. So I don't want it to sound like I'm judging other people, but I'm just as much judging myself and my culture. But since we don't keep the commandment to keep the Sabbath, since we do not in any form or fashion keep the Sabbath, then this type of prayer is not accessible to us very easily. Because what we mean by a day off is a time to do the things we couldn't do while we were getting paid to work, and taking care of things and busyness. And I have known some individuals, and Tammy and I have made a real hard effort to keep Sabbath in more complete ways. But we don't have a culture that has Sabbath and has rest. So people will guilt you for sleeping. If you sleep 10 hours a day, they'll laugh at you. Or if you have days off, they'll say, "Boy, how can you have so many days off?"
That's right.
And but let's walk through the chapter, and then share a couple other things. When Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest," he wasn't saying, "Think about me and stay busy, and I'll give you rest."
Good point.
How do you come to be with Christ? And so the prayer of rest is really about being with Christ in a way in which we are not in charge. We're not doing, we're not fixing, we're not accomplishing during the rest. And as he points out when he talks about prayer in the middle voice, in language, in Greek and in Greek as well, there's active voice, passive voice, and middle voice. Active voice is when you're doing something. Passive voice is when something's being done to you, and middle voice is when it's both. You're doing something and something's being done to you, done for you. And that middle voice is what happens in Sabbath rest, what happens in the kind of rest that Christ calls us to. And the kind of rest that God said, "You can't be my people if you don't do it." Remember, 10 Commandments is, "You are not my people if you don't do these things," because they are, "If you are my people, you will do these things." Here's 10 big ones. You'll do these things. And since we tend not to keep the first 4 related to fidelity to God, when we get to Sabbath, we don't do it either, because that would be to actually put God first and let God be God for a day. It's very hard for us to do it. I think it's very hard. But he says, 93, "If only we could know that steady peace of God, where all strain is gone, and Christ is already victor over the world." And even the idea of Christ's victory, we think that means winning something, Christ being in charge and destroying our enemies, and there's no opposition. We think that's what the victory is. The victory, Jesus was winning on the cross, and we don't really understand and accept and embrace the fact that he was winning on the cross, because the world could not make him into anyone other than who he was intended to be. They could not force him to be unfaithful, and could not force him to live as an imposter, to take on the world's value system and act the way the world acts. And so he was actually the strongest one in the world the moment he died, because he would not cave to all of the pressures. It's very hard to be yourself, to be the person God asks us to be, each of us asks us to be. We want to do things that we think need to be done, which may not be ours to do. So the Sabbath prayer is the next thing on 94. He talks about the Sabbath prayer. I've got a collection of books on the Sabbath, but the one I think is the easiest accessible and my favorite is Keeping the Sabbath Holy, which is not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-L-Y. In other words, keeping the Sabbath completely. And by Marva Dawn, and her 4 words on the front are ceasing, resting, embracing, and feasting. Could we rest enough to go have a really good time, to feast together, to act? People seeing us, they would say, "It doesn't look like his wife has cancer. Look how happy he is. It doesn't look like this is going wrong. This is happening in the world." And the feasting would actually happen inside of who we are in God, not who we are in the circumstance. And it doesn't mean you don't leave the Sabbath and for 6 days, remember 6 days, work. God didn't say don't work. 6 days, get at it. Do what's yours to do on one day, and regularly remember to enter into a space where everything is referenced to God, including yourself. And that so the next section, he calls it resting in God. The resting of God on the seventh day became the theological framework for the Sabbath regulation that summons us to rest in God. I haven't said this story in this context. I may have used it in a sermon because it was a big moment in my life, but I've been friends with a rabbi who was at the Reform Synagogue in Durham, and Rabbi Sager, and he taught me Jewish theology back in the seminary. And then when I came back to the area and he and I crossed paths, we started meeting at the Mad Hatter Cafe in Durham, and we would talk, and I got lots of wisdom from meeting with him. But one of the times we were setting up a meeting on a Monday morning, and I emailed him Friday afternoon, how about Monday at 10 at the Mad Hatter? And I didn't get a response till 6:30 Saturday night. And 6:30 Saturday night, I got an email. So he didn't answer for over 24 hours. He didn't answer his email, which was not like him, because it was the first time I guess I'd ever emailed him on a Friday afternoon. But all the other times he was very prompt in replying. Never went to the next day. And so when we met, I said, I noticed you replied Saturday evening. He said, yeah. I responded, I checked my email as soon as Sabbath ended. And I said, boy, that's really good. I can't imagine, I was just confessing to him, I can't imagine not paying attention to your email for 24 hours as a minister. How in the world do you do that? And he said, well, you Christians don't keep the Sabbath, so it seems hard to you. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, my whole community keeps the Sabbath. No one would call me on the Sabbath unless it was worth breaking the Sabbath. And so everyone who knows me and relates to me keeps the Sabbath too. So you don't ask them. And I said, well, what do you do if there's an emergency? And he said, well, if someone calls, this is back in the days of answering machines. Now I guess we have one built into our phones, but voicemail. He said, if my phone rings, I let the answering machine pick it up, and I'll listen to the message, and I get to decide if it's a reason to break Sabbath or if it just waits till the end of Sabbath. He said, but you have to remember, in my community, when the phone rings, someone else has determined it's to break Sabbath, it's worth breaking Sabbath, or they're just leaving me a message to get when the Sabbath's over, and I get to find that out. And I said, well, but you really don't rest on Sabbath because you deliver your sermon and you talk to people. And he said, well, George, delivering my sermon is not work. Preparing my sermon is my work. Delivering my sermon is like serving the Sabbath meal for anybody who helped prepare it. It's like delivering a lesson or doing your part in Sabbath school. We call them Sunday school because it's on Sunday, but they have Sabbath school. That's all part of our life as a community. So whatever I do as part of the gathering of the community is a gift that I give, but it's not work. But I work diligently in preparing it, but it's just a gift when I give it. And I said, well, do you ever just get out and mow grass and get out? I said, I find it just so therapeutic, so relaxing to work in the yard. And he said, no, creation needs Sabbath too. I don't do violence to plants on Sabbath, and I don't do the work of watering on Sabbath. That's the day we all rest and grow and in God. So the growth of Sabbath is always in God and not forced by us by pruning or. And I was like, holy cow! My mind was just being blown. And I'd already started thinking about Sabbath, but that was, years ago. And I began to see that the reason when someone would ask me to be silent, or my spiritual director was, George, why don't you try 24 hours of not speaking and try not to always have an agenda in your head. I'm like, what? That seems unfaithful to me. I mean, I was such a workaholic, that seemed unfaithful, like to do that. And so resting in God I became aware that resting in God is actually what God commanded us to do. And yet my experience was that I wasn't doing it in any complete way. And my experience continues to be, it's hard to do. Because our culture demands that we not really depend on God. So we have emotions where we want people to act certain ways, we want problems in the world to be solved, and yet we're very demanding. And again, he did not say take 7 days off. And he didn't say always rest. And so he goes on in 96, he talks about the middle voice. And he says it doesn't, on 97, he said, in that little paragraph in the middle, it says, it does not mean that we sit back and hope God will do something. That is a Hindu concept of prayer in which we sink passively into the impersonal and faded will of gods and goddesses. One of the reasons that when I discovered prayer and meditation, I learned some of the disciplines from people in the Eastern traditions. But one of the reasons I chose not to enter into the Eastern religions is that one of the differences is how we engage the world as Christians versus other forms of spiritual life. And there is a prayer that leads you to live in nothingness, to live in separation, to live in total detachment. And I think we need to detach in order to get perspective, but I don't think we live detached. Does that make sense? Is that one? Seriously, does that make sense? We need to not be in the fray, in the panic of the moment in order to get perspective. And we need to have God, to be able to conceive in our minds and feel in our souls that God's God and we're not. But that doesn't mean you don't then engage. When you have the direction you need, the clarity you need, you get back at it in harmony with what God wants. But we have to get perspective and rest. Another way I learned Sabbath was that Tammy and I, keep date night, and Tammy and I go away together. Teresa and David are talking about getting away. Well, I actually want to be with Tammy, and there are friends when you go away to be with friends. And my experience is when I gather with Wendell Christian Church on Sundays, there are some people I want to be together and just be together in the love we share and in God, and not be chased all the time by all the demands and the pressures. And when we are in worship on Sabbath, when I'm with Tammy on a date night or with a friend, that we set aside time. This is not we're hanging out as a friend or going fishing. This is we're going to sit down, and I would like to be with you and find acceptance and give you acceptance, be listened to and you listen to me, and we're just going to trust each other in this moment. You have to create those moments, right?
In our society, yes.
Why be faithful to come to church? Why enter into the moment where you take the bread and the cup, and in that moment we're back to pure grace and love and peace with Christ? Why make that happen every week?
Because we need it.
If that's not our reference point, then let's admit it's not our reference point. I don't really live that way. I don't live as if that's true. Or I'm really good because I don't need to keep being reminded, because I always know Jesus is Lord. I always follow God.
No.
It's not my experience. When I coach baseball, you may recognize that when the outfielder gets the ball hit to him, you are to hit the cutoff man You are to throw to the cutoff man. You're not to try to throw it as hard as you can all the way to the home plate or whatever. You always throw to the cutoff man, and the cutoff man can duck and let the ball go through if it's the correct thing to do. But you always, what do you always do? You always throw to the cutoff man. Every time you throw to the cutoff man. And you know how many times coaches watch their outfielders try to throw it all the way and don't hit the cutoff man, and the guy that was on first is now on second, and the guy from third was going to score anyway. And how many times do you have to be reminded? Always hit the cutoff man. Always hit the cutoff man. Always, every time hit the cutoff man. You know, if it's the last play of a game, the winning run's coming in, then of course you got to chuck it all the way because the game's over at that point. But there's still more to play, and you know. So I can just tell you that, you know, I watched the All-Star game last night. I'm like, hit the cutoff man, people. You know, how many times have coaches told those guys to hit the cutoff man? But I'm a big man. I'm going to throw it all the way. So how many times do we need to gather? How often do we need to take a day and remember to always rest in God, to always harmonize our life with God? How many times do we need to be reminded? I think that's why we need this lesson. But it's very hard. He also talks on 98 about holy leisure. Audium sanctum, it's just Latin words. They're in the paragraph just above activity of the everlasting Trinity. The holy, it means the ability to carry on the activities of the day filled with the cosmic patience of God. Do we believe God is God and that God is still going to be working with us and loving us and with us? Then we would be able to relax in ways that we couldn't otherwise. When I was in seminary, Tammy and I we basically run out of money and we were about to run out of food, and we were sitting on at the dining room table and we were trying to figure out what to do next. And I didn't want to call my parents because I thought, you know, God had brought me to seminary, and so we were at a place where we just had a brand new baby, and I didn't know what to do and what job did I need. And so we stopped and prayed, and the baby was content. Why was Trip okay? He actually hadn't decided not to trust his parents. He actually hadn't decided to panic, and he wasn't maybe even aware of everything. And we had invited the pastor and his wife over for lunch after church, you know, and we were deciding what we would fix. And we managed to put something together, and at lunch the pastor's wife asked us how we were doing, and we were honest, and she told me about a job at Dorothea Dix Hospital where she worked, and I, a couple weeks later, had a job at Dorothea Dix Hospital working second shift, and I could have trusted and slept while that was unfolding, but I didn't. Does that make sense? So Jesus, he points out Romans 8:26 and 27, where he talks about the prayer that is too deep for words. And sometimes when we're quiet, what we're doing is just letting the prayer within us and the Spirit within us work, and we don't have words. Mm-hmm. We're way beyond that.
I've been there many times, but until I read that, and I read that over and over, and I still didn't understand it until you said it just now, because there's times that I need prayer, but I don't even know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And I just sat there quietly thinking, you know what's going on. I don't even know how to put it in words. You've been here, you witnessed it, you know. And
there you go. Yep.
And I think that's comforting, Debbie, that we know that the Spirit kind of intercedes for us in those times when we're at a loss of what we're feeling and what we want to express to God. You know, it takes our place, and that's comforting to me to know, because like you, I've been there many, many times when all I could say was, "Fix it, Jesus," you know. That's,
But I felt I didn't well, I've had that feeling, but I just didn't, I felt like, am I not doing something right? Or what am I supposed to say here? And until this, I didn't realize I don't really have to say anything.
Right.
I didn't understand that I didn't really have to say anything. I thought I had to say a prayer and say a prayer correctly, but that made me feel better. So that was a growing moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, do y'all know that written language came a long time after language? So just think about it. I was trying to help the logic flow. So when we read this book, there are these printed words that point to sounds and collections of sounds that are language. And then you're in a moment and there's a lot of understanding and experience in your head, and then you put words on it. And you've separated yourself to some degree from what's in your head by putting words on it, because words reduce it down to something that's not really everything in your head, because you can't put words on everything in your head. And once you reflect on what's in your head, you have reduced your thoughts down to a story you're telling yourself about what's going on in your head that doesn't capture everything going on in your head. Because brain science has found out by watching the way the brain activates that the part of our brain that forms a story and then says something is like 5% of our brain, and the whole brain's active. So the minute we put thoughts, words, and then write down something, it's really just inviting us to go back to before the words. And so when I would watch Tammy nurse the boys, and she would have tears in her eyes, and it would like be her most intimate moment of her life. And then I would say, what are you feeling? The minute she thought about it and started to talk words, she reduced the moment. It got smaller. The minute it went smaller. Oh, it's that I'm bonded to this one who was formed in my womb, and that's right. And I don't know that because that didn't happen. That's not how I found Tripp and Stephen. I found them after that had happened. You know, and in that moment, like a sunrise, you watch a sunrise, and there's this experience in the silence of watching a sunrise that just in awe and wonder, and then someone says, what are you feeling? And then you start thinking about it, and the sunrise is gone. You're now in your head, you're not in the sunrise. And I'm trying to figure out a way to illustrate what he's inviting us to, and what I find hard to do. But the benefit of doing it is huge. It's to actually sit with God and let God be God before we start doing our thinking and our talking and our solving our problems. And what can you imagine in that space that you can't imagine, reading a book? But then somebody writes some words that cause you to think and bring you back. What's God wanting you to do? Come to me, all your burdened, heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You'll have rest in my arms, not in your thinking and doing. When we were on vacation at the lake, I was sitting down. My son Stephen, who's 37 came in, climbed up in my lap. He said, I know you like this. And so I just was holding him, and his boys were like, what are you doing, Daddy? He said, I'm sitting in my daddy's lap. And they're like, that's funny, Daddy, you're sitting in your daddy's lap. And you're like, you never get too big for that, right? And if somebody had said, why is George crying? The minute I started to talk about it, it would have gotten smaller. It would have been like, oh, if I ever was able to give my son what I want my son to have, it would be what I hope he knows when he's sitting there in my lap. And that ultimately he's in the lap of God, not in his daddy's lap, because his daddy's a mess sometimes. Resting in God. When we speak to God, it is really the God who lives in us speaking through us to himself. The dialogue of grace is really the monologue of the divine nature in self-communing love. P.T. Forsyth, it's there on 99. Since we are part of God, and all the experiences we're having are part of God, if we really take in as much of the moment as we can, we're taking in as much of God as we can. I don't know if maybe that was going too far with the thought, but find it true. Anything else you guys noticed? Or are thinking now or wondering about? He goes to 3 classical practices on 100. Solitude, which again is something we don't do much in our culture, to actually go and spend time in solitude. He talks about taking 4 private retreats. When I was in full-time ministry, I would do it twice a year, and that seemed hard to make time for twice a year. And then the silencio is the idea of turning off all the grasping and manipulating and striving. Just stop for a moment, for a time. And then recollection, the tranquility of mind, heart, and spirit. What if we rested our minds enough to let God guide what we next thought? Instead of us going to the next thing we think we ought to think about, try to rest long enough for God to do it. That's recollection 102. Were y'all helped by the cupping the hands lightly thing? Yeah, that's a good visual. You're being held, but you're not being constrained. For us too, the hands of God are cupped lightly. Enough freedom that we can stretch and grow, but also we have enough protection so that we will not be injured, and so we can be healed. This is the prayer of rest. So in the not too distant future, I hope, but as long as it takes, we'll take time to get there. My desire is for us as a church to go away on retreat together. And my guess is what'll happen is at the church, when I was at the churches I've been at before, and we had church-wide retreats, the first time we did it, very few people did it. Then the next time we did it, more people did it, and then it became something that virtually everyone went to every year, because they had never been together that way. So they thought they were going away to do things, or they thought they were going away to be religious. And really what it was what if you spent a time with people, and the reason you were there was to tell each other, the world may turn on you, but we won't. You may think you have needs that can't be met. We're the ones that say that you won't. If we're going to be community together, this is why we're here. And there's this love we seek in God that we're going to share with each other. And the truth is, between the idea and the experience of the love of God and practicing it with each other is a long way, right? But how do you conceive it, and how are you transformed into people who can actually love each other that way? And I would suggest that the prayer of rest is a big way you get there. So when Rabbi Sager was telling me about keeping Sabbath, he was actually describing this beautiful, mutually supportive community that made sure each other had one. It was, wow. Oof. And so what I hope for you and for myself is rest, whatever form it takes and however you get started. I decided to have the discipline of 20 minutes of silence and breathing. Our tradition calls it centering prayer. You can look up centering prayer on the internet and learn how to do it. And my record is 457 straight days of doing it.
Good gracious.
But when I started doing it, 5 minutes was impossible. I just couldn't slow my mind down. And now I can turn on the 20 minutes and it seems to go quickly, but I still let my mind wander in the 20 minutes, so that I think I'm going to give myself credit for punching the buttons to finish another day, but I'm not actually stopping my thinking. You know, it's a charade. Because what I wish for myself is not 457 days of starting and stopping the app and the water sounds for 20 minutes. What I actually want for myself is 20 minutes of letting God be God and taking a break from running the world. And letting God say, George, think about this maybe when we're done. Here, let me remind you of this and hold this. Rather than me, squirrel mind, you know, rabbit mind, the monkey brain, and whatever you want to call it, just boom, boom, boom. All right, Debbie, would you mind reading the prayer at the end there for us?
Blessed Savior, I am not good at resting in the hollow of your hand. Nothing in my experience has taught me this resting. I have been taught how to take charge. I have been taught how to be in control. But how to rest? No. I have no models, no paradigms for resting. That is not exactly right. Jesus, when you walked among the Jerusalem crowds and in the Judean hills, you pioneered this way of living. You were always alert and alive. You lived utterly responsive to the will of the Father. Manifold demands your place upon you, and still you worked in unhurried peace and power. Help me to walk in your steps. Teach me to see only what you see, to say only what you say, and to do only what you do. Help me, Lord, to work resting and to pray resting. I ask this in your good and strong name. Amen.
Man, thank you, Debbie. Next week we'll be looking at sacramental prayer and the prayers that we pray within the rituals and the sacred moments of our lives. So we'll be looking at that in chapter 10. Hope that y'all will be with us. Remember, you can be here in person as well here at the Fellowship Hall of Wendell Christian Church. Thank you.